Hey guys, what's up? I hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to the channel here at No Huddle Fantasy Sports, and welcome to the NFL Week 14 DFS Slate Playbook video here on the channel. Today is Friday, December 11th, 2020, and in this video, as always, we're talking NFL-specific DFS for this upcoming Sunday's main slate. Whether you play on FanDuel or DraftKings, I've got you covered here with the stats, the Vegas lines, the information, picks, players, core plays, everything you need to dominate and get ready for this upcoming Sunday's main slate. So, if you're here for daily fantasy football, I've got you covered. Sit back, relax. This is No Huddle Fantasy Sports. Hey guys, what's up? Hope you're all doing well. Welcome back to No Huddle Fantasy Sports here. I do appreciate, as always, you guys tuning in. It does mean a lot to me. We've had an up and down couple of weeks here, but we are back at it in week 14 of the NFL season. It's shaping up to be an exciting slate. I am really pumped to talk to you guys about what we have in store for us for this upcoming Sunday's main slate. As always, you know, we're talking about DraftKings and FanDuel. We'll focus in on specific pricing for both sites, but in general, we're going to put in the stats, we're going to put in the time, the effort to understand why we want to pick certain players, stack around certain players, and play the core plays, which we will mention throughout this video. But to back up, over the last couple of weeks, admittedly, it's been an up and down kind of, I guess, content season here on No Huddle Fantasy Sports. So specifically over the last 2 or 3 weeks, the content has been up and down here on the channel. I do apologize to you guys. I know a lot of you typically are looking forward to these videos, have asked me, you know, over the last couple of weeks where the videos have been, and I have put out content. Videos have come out still on, I would say, a regular weekly basis, but just not as typical as they have been. And I apologize to you guys if you have been looking forward to that. But to be honest with you guys, the videos have fallen in line with what's been happening in the NFL in general, with weeks and games and all of the craziness that's been going on. So backing up basically to Thanksgiving was really getting ready for the next couple of weeks, getting ready for that Thanksgiving slate especially. But in general, we had a ton of moving parts, whether it was involving COVID or postponements or players just simply missing games. It was pretty crazy, and I just was not comfortable putting out content that was either going to be stale very quickly, not be accurate, or not really reflect what I was doing. So again, I apologize to you guys. I just was not comfortable with what was happening. We did not have full slates. We had teams being included on both FanDuel and DraftKings, even though those games were no longer on that particular main slate. I personally was not playing as heavily or investing as much money, not nearly as much money as I had been on any other main slate over these last 2 or 3 weeks. So for me to put out content would have just been putting out content to put out content. And to be fair to you guys, when I put these videos out, this is truly a reflection of what I am playing, what I am investing money into. And if I wasn't doing it over the last couple of weeks, I just was not comfortable with delivering that to you guys. So again, I apologize if you were looking forward to that or looking forward to videos. Hopefully you guys didn't get burned over the last couple of weeks. I certainly, again, would have if I would have went all in, but in general just took a step back, took a little bit of a breather as things sorted themselves out. Now, the good news is we are back at it. We finally have a full slate on our hands this week, and it is shaping up for week 14 to be an absolutely exciting slate with a ton of options. This is a week that you use to define what daily fantasy football is. I am really pumped. If you can't tell already, we have a full main slate available. As I mentioned, 13 total games. There's no buys, there's no postponements, and as far as I'm aware, there's nothing in terms of a player missing due to positive testing. Obviously, these things are very fluid. They can change. It is Friday. It's about 4 o'clock in the afternoon. So you guys are going to have to do your due diligence as we approach this upcoming Sunday's main slate. But again, no bye weeks, no postponements. Things are shaping up to be a wonderful, great slate here. Now, I will mention, as of right now, there's 2 weather concerns. That is in Seattle, and that's in the San Francisco game. Looking like some rain, some wind, things like that. So again, pay attention to that. As far as I'm aware in this particular video and what I'm about to talk about, there's no players from those games that I think stand out as must plays, so that's good in terms of that. But again, just you guys are always aware there are sometimes weather concerns to pay attention to. As I mentioned, this is shaping up to be one of the best DFS slates, in my opinion, all year long, but certainly over the last month or so. I'm really, really looking forward to it. We have a ton of options. You can see here, options, options, options. What does that mean? Especially at quarterback, when you have a ton of great quarterbacks on one particular slate, a lot of them in good matchups, you're going to finally see ownership spread out. And that's been an issue over the last month or so because of these, concentrated, really, I guess, focused in on a couple of teams type of main slates with postponements and games and things and all the nonsense that's been going on. You saw really heavy ownership. I mean, you've seen at times 40, 50, 60% ownership on a main slate dedicated to a particular player. That's not fun at all. That's a ton of chalk. We don't want to deal with that. We want to, have our picks and not have to worry too much about ownership. And I think we're finally at a week where we have that, and that is the case. You can play the number one quarterback, for example, this week. Let's just say it's Mahomes. He's going to be like 12% owned as the number one guy. That's not the truth, by the way. I'm just giving an example, but that's always good. You can get away with playing the number one owned guy at quarterback on a slate like this because the ownership is so evenly spread out. So I am excited from that. And then in terms of strategy this week, I'm going to give you guys some plays that are very expensive, some stacks that are expensive. So overall, we're going to have to do a balanced lineup strategy. I don't think we can go very top heavy at one particular position, but in general, we'll talk about that as we sort through the video. You can see here, for the most part, it's a pay up at quarterback for me, and then kind of be balanced at running back and wide receiver. And then of course, almost as always, we're paying down at tight end outside of, your top two guys at that particular position. But let's set the table here as always. Let's talk Vegas lines specifically. Some things I want to point out. First and foremost, I took these lines last night on Thursday. It is now Friday about 4 o'clock. So these things may have changed already, and they're certainly going to move and change as we approach the weekend and as we approach the start of 1 o'clock on Sunday. But just as a general idea, these things are probably relatively accurate still. To talk about some of the teams that stand out both from a high scoring perspective and teams you may want to avoid, you can see here Tampa Bay, Kansas City, Tennessee, Seattle, and Green Bay, all teams projected above 28 implied team totals, meaning tons of points are expected from Vegas to be scored by those teams. So those are certainly teams you may want to consider stacking players from, taking multiple players from, things of that nature. On the flip side, Miami, Cincinnati, Denver, New York Jets especially, Washington, and Philadelphia, all projected at 22 or less points on the slate, implied team total that is. These teams are teams that you may want to avoid stacking. I'm not suggesting that's the only way to go, but from a Vegas perspective, as we set the table for this slate, that's what you're dealing with. Those are the teams that are projected to score the most. Those are the teams that are projected to score the least. And then you have everything in between. So take a quick look here. You can see in general, you have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 games at 50 or more in terms of an over-under. Teams, game stacks you may want to consider. A couple others, such as that Atlanta-Los Angeles Chargers game, 49.5. That could easily hit 50 if it hasn't already. So again, something to consider. But that's what we're dealing with from Vegas. As we approach the next couple of picks here, or the core plays that we'll talk about, you'll see that fit into this model, or fit into what we're talking about from a Vegas perspective. So as always, we're going to start with the quarterback position. I'm giving you basically at this point in time a very expensive play in general, and then a very, I wouldn't say cheap play, but a much more affordable play. The first guy I'm going to start out with is Aaron Rodgers. He's $7,500 on DraftKings, $9,100 on FanDuel. He's the most expensive quarterback on FanDuel, if I'm not mistaken. I think he's the fourth most expensive player, or should I say quarterback, on DraftKings. Now, in general, him himself does not make it the most expensive play. It's stacking him with who I think you have to stack him with, which is Davante Adams. That combination makes it extremely expensive, and hopefully as a result that will also help in terms of ownership, but we'll have to see how that plays out. In general, as I mentioned though, here he's playing on the road, which we do like for quarterbacks, in Detroit, a divisional game. He typically gets up for these types of games. It's a 55 over under. It's going to be played indoors, always good for offense. Really high over under there, if not the highest on the slate. Green Bay is a huge favorite on the road, which is a little bit of a damper for Rodgers, but we've played him the last couple of weeks in the videos I've mentioned, and in general, it doesn't matter how much of a favorite he is. He is literally force-feeding the ball to Davante Adams. In addition to that, he is continuing to throw multiple touchdowns, which we will talk about. So minus 7.5 point favorites on the road here with a 31.3 implied team total. So a very nice, healthy, big implied team total. points should be scored by this Green Bay offense. Overall, Aaron Rodgers, in my opinion, is the front runner right now for MVP. He has been on an absolute tear over the last 7 weeks, 7 games, 7 starts. He has multiple passing touchdowns across those 7 games. In each game, I should say, 2 or 3, even 4 at one point, touchdowns in every single one of those games. He has a minimum of 22 fantasy points scored in each of those last 7 games. It's a very predictable stack with Davante Adams, so not only do we enjoy picking quarterbacks that are in great spots, but we really enjoy the fact that we can also predict where the ball will go in terms of him and his wide receivers, and certainly that's the case here with Davante Adams, so you do have to like that, albeit it is very expensive to put them together. But beyond that, this week is again another week where Green Bay's offensive line is in a great position. Aaron Rodgers should face very little pressure in terms of a pass rush. You can see here a very low pass rush threat with a plus 22% advantage for his offensive line compared to the defensive line, according to Pro Football Focus, meaning he should have time in the pocket, and Aaron Rodgers with time is just absolutely dangerous. Detroit, in terms of their defense and what he is facing, their secondary is graded 31st overall in football. If you didn't know, there's only 32 teams in football, so it's an excellent grade, or should I say it's a really bad grade for Detroit, but an excellent spot for any quarterback facing that secondary. Detroit's allowing 262 passing yards per game. That's 27th overall in football, a 67% completion rate. That's 23rd overall in football, and they're giving up the 11th most fantasy points per game to quarterbacks. So basically, this is at minimum a bottom 10 team versus quarterbacks versus the pass game, if not even worse. Aaron Rodgers is in a great spot any given week. He's matchup proof. He gets it up, whoever he's facing. But this week is an excellent week on the road versus Detroit. Aaron Rodgers, by far my favorite quarterback. It's going to be difficult to afford his salary with Davante Adams, but I will show you some key players that I think make it work. This video will be centered around that play, that stack. Don't worry, I'm not just going to give you the most expensive Derrick Henrys and Dalvin Cooks. We're going to make it work, and we're going to make sure you guys have the plays that fit with Aaron Rodgers. Moving on though, the other guy I want to mention here, should we not be playing Rodgers, there are other guys I'm considering, but in general, I think a guy that's in a great spot this week is Taysom Hill. We're not playing him this week at tight end. Obviously, he's now fully centered around the quarterback position, but he's $6,600 on DraftKings, $7,700 on FanDuel, playing on the road this week in Philadelphia with a 42.5 over-under. So not the greatest over-under, but the play here is more specific to Hill and his abilities and what he does through rushing than really anything else. So New Orleans, though, is a 7-point favorite on the road here in Philadelphia with a 25.3 implied team total. That is an average implied team total. It's not bad, it's not great, but again, we're talking about Hill and his abilities and what he brings to the table for his specific salary. He's the 9th priced quarterback on the slate, whether it's FanDuel or DraftKings. I've verified both. He is still the 9th priced quarterback. That offers a ton of value for a guy that easily could place within the top 5, given a couple things have to go right, but in general, what he gives you, at a very minimum, his price is great for being the 9th priced quarterback. Steady passing game improvement. We saw him last week throw 2 touchdowns. They threw the ball a lot. I think he had, I don't want to quote it off the top of my head, but he had the most passing attempts of his 3 starts. I think he had the best efficiency, the best completion rate, all things pointing up over the last 3 games, kind of finishing last week with his best passing performance. He is an affordable stack in general, so if you take him with, say, Michael Thomas, for example, who I will talk about a little bit later, both of those guys are priced down, or should I say Michael Thomas is priced down because of essentially Taysom Hill is playing quarterback and the results have not been there necessarily. But in general, it's an affordable stack where we can get other more expensive players involved. He's offering a steady weekly floor because of his rushing ability. That is Hill. You can see here he's averaging a minimum of 10 rushing attempts per game, and that averages out to 11. If you go over the last 3 games that he has started, he's averaged 11 rushing attempts per game. You're not getting that out of anyone else. You're barely getting that out of Lamar Jackson. You're barely getting that out of Kyler Murray. And Taysom Hill is priced way below those guys. So we're going to take advantage of that this week at his $7,700 price tag. More on him though in general, averaging 22 plus fantasy points per game over his first 3 starts. Really, really good numbers. Again, he threw 2 touchdown passes last week. Should we get 2, that's an excellent number to have, obviously, but he's doing it even without touchdown passes. It's all just icing on the cake should he be able to do more through the air. We're really focusing in on his rushing ability here. He has 11 red zone rushing attempts, something that I really, really enjoyed looking into for him specifically. It's one reason I boosted him up to my number 2 quarterback here. You're not getting that out of other quarterbacks, especially on this particular slate. The guy he's pounding the ball in the red zone. He's like a Cam Newton when it comes to the red zone. So it's something, again, we want to take advantage of. And then last but not least here, in terms of the matchup, Philadelphia has a pretty good defense. Now, their offense puts them in really, really bad situations, but in general, I will give it to them. Philadelphia has a good defense, but overall, their secondary still is not graded out that well this season. According to Pro Football Focus, they are graded 26th overall in football. So it's definitely a defense you can take advantage of. I believe Taysom Hill will be able to take care of the pass rush of the Eagles, do more with his legs, and hopefully do a little bit through the air. Again, value pricing here. His price is very affordable. It helps us fit a lot of more expensive players around him as a core play. So Taysom Hill is definitely one of my top quarterbacks to recommend this week in DFS. Moving on to the running back position here, a couple of guys I'll mention right off the bat. And again, these guys are starting at lower price points. They're not expensive guys. They're not Derrick Henry. They're not 10K Dalvin Cooks. They're not cheap guys either. These guys, I think, make it work with Aaron Rodgers, definitely make it work with Hill. But in general, I want to start with James Robinson, who's priced $7,500 on DraftKings, $8K on FanDuel. He's playing at home this week versus Tennessee, which we always like to take home running backs. 52.5 over-under. Have to love that over-under. Really, really high over-under on this particular game. Jacksonville is a big underdog, though, at plus 7.5 with a 22.8 implied team total. So those numbers aren't excellent, especially for a running back, but trust me, I believe James Robinson still gets it done here in week 14. As I mentioned, home underdog, but in general, if you go through his game log or go through the Jaguars game log, when haven't they been an underdog? They've lost, I think, their last 8 games or something. Regardless of that, he continues, James Robinson that is, to excel in his role even when they're losing. So for that reason, I am comfortable playing him here at this price tag. Let's go back over his last 3 games. Always important to see how he's trending or how that particular back is trending. He's averaging 84% of the running back snaps. That's a great check mark to have. And he's averaging 23 touches per game over his last 3 games. Really, really healthy numbers there, especially considering his price tag. But more importantly, he has 14 targets over those last 3 games, essentially getting 5 targets a game. Even when they're down, this guy does not come off the field. He plays all 3 downs, and he's heavily involved in the passing game. You have to love that, especially in the situation that he's in, which is they're going to be underdogs here, probably going to be trailing most of the game. James Robinson still getting it done through the passing game, through the air. In week 2, though, let's go back to week 2. Earlier this season on the road in Tennessee versus the same team, he had 16 rushing attempts, 102 rushing yards, and 1 touchdown. This was really his coming out game. Tennessee's defense has been struggling. They've been struggling more and more. It seems like they get weaker and worse each and every week. We saw them give up 45 points to the Cleveland Browns last week. Now, they do a lot on offense, but in general, their defense is not very good. So I think James Robinson is in a good spot versus a weak defense here. Tennessee's rushing defense, just to put it in perspective, they're graded 19th overall in football. According to Pro Football Focus, that is bottom half of the league, and they're allowing 4.2 yards per carry. That's the 12th most overall in football. So again, really, really good numbers there to focus in on in terms of James Robinson in the rushing attack for Jacksonville. I do like James Robinson. He's my favorite, mid-price guy to play. I'll be getting a lot of exposure to him this week in week 14. Another guy that I think Robinson just kind of edged out here, basically because of ownership, is David Montgomery. He's $6,500 on DraftKings, $6,600 on FanDuel. I do really like the spot he's in, playing at home versus Houston. 45.5 over-under. Chicago has looked better over the last couple of weeks, surprisingly, with Trubinsky. We'll see if that continues, but Chicago is a home underdog here, basically a pick'em game at +1 with a 22 implied team total. Now, his salary has jumped nearly $1,000, but his role continues to get better. It continues to increase. His opportunities continue to increase. He's really been excellent over his last 2 games. You saw Montgomery get 80% of the snaps over those 2 games, and he's averaged 18 total touches. More importantly, he He has 10 targets across those 2 games. We're finally starting to see David Montgomery become used more and more in the passing game. Cohen went down half a year ago, and Montgomery right away just did not. It was just a really weird way in which they use Montgomery. We're finally starting to see him see more targets, which is absolutely what we want out of Montgomery and absolutely what we want out of this price for him in this situation versus Houston. He's averaging 6.2 yards per carry. I don't want to underestimate that. The dude has been a monster. He has not had a ton of carries. You're averaging, 12, 15 carries over the last 2 games, but in general, 6.2 yards per carry. He's been dangerous when he gets the ball on the ground. He scored multiple touchdowns. David Montgomery has been a monster over the last 2 games, so let's take advantage of that. Now, the other part of this equation is Houston's awful rush defense. They're graded 28th overall in football, according to Pro Football Focus. They're allowing 4.9 yards per carry. That is 31st overall in football, so that's absolutely the worst, or should I say second worst in football. It's a really, really bad number. And their rushing defense in general is giving up the second most fantasy points per game to the running back. So in general, David Montgomery is in a smash spot here. Excellent spot. The only thing I will warn, and the only reason he is not my number 1 back, is he is going to be heavily owned. He could be one of the highest owned running backs on the slate. We'll see how it shapes up. It is still Friday, but it is the only thing that's keeping him off of my number 1 play here. And we've seen him have bad games. So if he's going to be really highly owned, it's something to consider. I think you can leverage off him a little bit in other situations with other backs. But in general, he's still a great play this week, just based upon the numbers and what's on the sheet here. 2 other guys I want to give you as we approach the end of the running back core plays here. That's DeAndre Swift for Detroit. He's 6,500 on DraftKings, 69 on FanDuel. Playing at home this week versus Green Bay, 55 over/under. Detroit is a huge underdog at plus 7.5 with a 23.8 implied team total. Now, this guy's been out the last couple of weeks. I think he's been out since week 9 or 10, but now he's expected to play. He's supposed to be healthy. He should be returning to a lead role. And let's talk about that lead role, and that is pretty much the reason why I like him so much this week. He was trending up prior to his injury. Week 9, his snap count was 40%. Week 10, his snap count became 73%. He averaged across those 2 games 5 yards per carry. In addition to that, you saw him get 10 targets across those 2 games. This guy was kind of morphing into the lead back, the main back, the back you expected that they drafted. I really, really like Swift as a player coming into the season, but we didn't really see him start to get utilized until those 2 weeks prior to his injury. So we're going to have to see how this plays out. I think he is my favorite play to come back against the Aaron Rodgers stack. I always do that. If we're going to play Rodgers stacked with Adams and maybe somebody else, Lazard, I do like to come back, hope for a little bit of a shootout here, and I do like to come back with some player from the other team. That player to me is either going to be Marvin Jones Jr. or DeAndre Swift. Right now it's DeAndre Swift, and it's mainly because the way you attack Green Bay is very, very weak versus the run. In fact, they're graded 21st overall according to Pro Football Focus. They're allowing 4.6 yards per carry. So you can definitely attack Green Bay on the ground. Detroit is playing at home here. I see no reason. If you're going to game plan, they should be attacking Green Bay on the ground here. Swift would be in a great spot if he gets up to that 70-75% snap count, gets 15, 20 touches against Green Bay. At this price tag, I do really like DeAndre Swift. The last guy I want to mention here, again, this is a guy that probably will see some ownership. I see people talking about him a little bit. We did play him last week. That's Myles Gaskin, $5,600 on DraftKings, $6K on FanDuel, playing at home this week versus Kansas City with a 50.5 over/under. Miami, again, it seems to be the story this week with running backs that I like. They are underdogs. Miami is a plus 7.5 point big underdog here, more than a touchdown with a 21.3 implied team total. The key here is A, the price on him, and B, we're trying to, which is not always the smartest thing, but we're trying to predict what the Miami Dolphins will do with Tua and will do as an offense as a whole playing at home versus Kansas City and Patrick Mahomes. They should try to run the ball. I mean, that is what they're good at. They have a young rookie quarterback trying to get him established. They have a decent defense, and they're playing the most explosive offense in the NFL. So how are you going to deal with that? You got to slow that offense down. You slow that offense down by slowing your own offense down and trying to grind out some possessions. At least that's the prediction here, and that's why I'm interested in Myles Gaskin. Again, he offers solid value at the running back position. The game script for Miami should include a heavy dose of Gaskin, a heavy dose of the run. Week 13, though, let's talk about the week he did return from injury this past week. He played very, very well. Saw 71% of the snaps, 23 total touches. More importantly, the big thing that stood out to me, he got 7 red zone rushing attempts. Did he score? No, of course he didn't. But if you're going to get that many red zone rushing attempts, at some point you're going to fall into the end zone. I don't know if he'll get that many this week, but it's certainly good to see that he is the back that they're using the majority of the time on the field, but more importantly, he is the back that they're using in the red zone. It sets up for a good opportunity knowing those stats play out eventually. Finally here, Kansas City's rushing defense is how you want to attack Kansas City. They're graded 20th overall according to Pro Football Focus, so bottom half of the league. They're allowing 4.8 yards per carry. That's 30th overall in football. Dudes are basically going 5 yards without being touched versus Kansas City. If Miami doesn't rely on the run here, I just give up. I don't know how they coach games or why, but in general, we want to take advantage of that, and that's why we like Gaskins at home. Finally here, I want to talk about what their defense is doing in terms of giving up points to the running back position. Well, they're ranked 13th overall according to basically the stats here. It's 13th most fantasy points per game to the position. So Myles Gaskin, a cheap alternative that you can play, helps fit with more expensive stacks, helps fit with your Aaron Rodgers. I do like Myles Gaskin here at the price tag listed. Moving on to the wide receiver position here, and we will try to pick it up. Of course, the first guy I will mention is Davante Adams. He's the guy I'm going to be stacking with Aaron Rodgers 99.9% of the time. Will there be other guys? Of course. Will I try to fit other people with Adams? Yes. I will very, very rarely go away from Adams when I have Rodgers, though, and it's just simply because it's an unstoppable force right now. $9,300 on DraftKings, very, very expensive. $9,600 on FanDuel. You can see the price on him plus Rodgers becomes very, very, very expensive, cost prohibitive. You're gonna have to find some value. That's why I gave you the positions or the players I gave you at the running back position. All the things still apply here. Playing at Detroit, 55 over under. Green Bay is a huge 7.5 point favorite with a 31.3 implied team total. Now, let's talk about Davante Adams. They've been big favorites in almost every game over the last month or two, right? He still is eating and eating and eating. He has a touchdown in each of his last 7 games. More importantly, several of those games are 2 touchdown games, so it's not like he's just scoring 1 per game. The dude has just been absolutely a monster over the last 7 weeks, coinciding with Aaron Rodgers also being a monster. Double-digit targets in 6 of the last 8 games, something we like to see there. He leads the NFL with a 33% target share. He leads the NFL with 26 red zone targets. He's top 5 in the NFL with a 37% of his team air yards. And then he's number 1 Pro Football Focus season rated receiver. So the dude has been, without a doubt, excellent. And everybody knows this. We're not hiding it. If you expect Aaron Rodgers to go off, you pretty much can correlate that with Davante Adams going off. If you expect Davante Adams to go off, you can correlate that well with Aaron Rodgers going off. So you got to play the two together. That's why he's my number 1 listed receiver here, albeit he is very expensive. Finally here, if there isn't anything else to add, in terms of Pro Football Focus, the wide receiver cornerback matchup for him is in favor of him by a ton, plus 43% to be exact. So really, really good number there. That's 3rd overall on this particular slate. And then the secondary for Detroit, I talked about it with Rodgers. They're graded 31st overall in football, according to Pro Football Focus. So just a really, really good spot for Davante Adams. We saw it last week. Even when they're on the 1 yard line, I think they were on the 1, and you're like, here comes Aaron Jones. Nope, 3 straight pass attempts to Davante Adams until they scored with Adams. It's absolutely unbelievable, but it's good for DFS. It's good to know where he is, where Rodgers and Adams are going. So again, Davante Adams by far my favorite receiver on the slate, and definitely the guy you want to pair with Aaron Rodgers. Now, I think you can save some money here. If we're going to talk about Taysom Hill, the guy I'm going to pair him with is Michael Thomas, whose price is, I would say it's fair, but it's criminally low compared to the Michael Thomas we all know and love. He's $7,100 on DraftKings, $73 on FanDuel. Keep in mind, this guy is priced like Davante Adams or higher, typically each and every week when he's healthy and when he's typically performing with his normal quarterback. Playing on the road here in Philadelphia, 43 over under. New Orleans is a minus 6.5 point favorite on the road with a 25.3 implied team total. What you can expect from him is basically lower ownership and what you see here, which is a lower salary. I'll take my chances. He is a big upside guy. Philadelphia's secondary is banged up. A lot of people want to talk about Darius Slay and the fact that he will, he shuts down people. Well, A, it's Michael Thomas. He doesn't get shut down. And B, Slay is a little banged up. We've seen him get torched by Metcalf and other receivers over the last couple of weeks. So I'm definitely not afraid of that matchup. And if that lowers ownership, great. That's why we're here. That's why we're looking into it. But the things I want to mention here, he actually has been pretty good or consistent with Taysom Hill at quarterback. We're talking weeks 11 through weeks 13, 3 total weeks here. He still has a 42% target share, a 56% of his team's air yards, and he's gotten 5 red zone targets. Those numbers are great. At some point, they're going to start paying off, and they have been. I mean, the guy has gotten a lot of points. His price has not been way up there in terms of salary, but the guy has had 2 of the 3 weeks been very, very good and gotten double-digit targets. So we want to focus in on the stats. We don't just want to say, oh, Hill is quarterback, we don't want to play these players. No, let's look into it. Michael Thomas has been performing, or has been put into a position, more importantly, with opportunity to perform, and that's what we want to attack here at his lower price tag. As I mentioned, double-digit targets in 2 of the last 3 games, and then finally here, Philadelphia secondary. It's everything I mentioned with Hill. Their secondary is graded 26th overall in football, according to Pro Football Focus, so really, really bad. Bottom 5 number there, and Philadelphia is allowing a 67% completion rate. Basically, every 4 balls, 3 of them are getting caught when thrown into that secondary. You have to like that. That's 25th overall in football. So Davante Adams, Michael Thomas, my top 2 receivers to give you guys for Week 14. Moving on here to 2 other guys, and the first guy I will mention is a little bit risky here, but this is kind of a play on ownership, and that's Chris Godwin. He's $6,300 on DraftKings, $74 on FanDuel, playing at home this week for Tampa versus Minnesota, 52.5 over under. Tampa Bay is a 6.5 point favorite with a 29 implied team total. A lot of points projected for this game and for the Tampa Bay Buccaneers this week. Chris Godwin hopefully will be a beneficiary of those high totals. Solid price, in my opinion. Both the price tags, whether it's FanDuel or DraftKings, leaves you room for upside. I think in general, if you focus in on Tampa Bay and Tom Brady, it's been a very, very pass-heavy offense. Do they want to do that weekly? I don't think so. But regardless, what they're doing is they're getting behind in games somehow, and they're throwing a ton. And as a result, you're seeing heavy, heavy pass volume. And that's good for wide receivers. That's good for Godwin and anyone else involved in that passing game. For I guess Tampa Bay, if you really look at the numbers, Chris Godwin is the most consistent Tampa Bay receiver, seeing 6 to 10 targets per game. Now, has he had the most upside of the receivers? No, he hasn't scored a lot of touchdowns. He has not broken 100 yards. But in general, the other guys, whether it's Mike Evans, Antonio Brown, Gronkowski, they're seeing sometimes 2 targets, sometimes they're scoring 2 touchdowns. This guy, Chris Godwin, has been very, very consistent. We're kind of waiting for that big game. I think this could be it versus Minnesota. As an inside receiver, I think he really, really can take advantage against this defense. The wide receiver cornerback matchup for him is plus 50% this week, according to Pro Football Focus. That is the second best. It's a really, really high number, but that is the second best on this particular slate. Minnesota, the defense he is facing, is allowing 2+ fantasy points per target. That's the second worst all in football. Again, 2+ fantasy points per target. Let's say this is a 10 target game for him. That's 20 points on average based upon these numbers that Chris Godwin could get versus the Minnesota team. You have to like that at his price tag. And then finally, the last thing I will mention here, Minnesota, it kind of coincides with what I had just said. They're allowing the 3rd most fantasy points per game to the wide receiver position. So hopefully Tom Brady looks his way early and often. Hopefully he finds the end zone and has a big game here. I do like him. I think he's going to be a very, very low-owned player. I do like Chris Godwin this week for Tampa Bay. Last but not least here, a guy I think you can save a lot of money on, and he offers a ton of value, is Tim Patrick for Denver. He's only $4,200 on DraftKings. The price is up there a little bit on FanDuel at $5,400, playing on the road here in Carolina, 45.5 over under. Denver is a slight road favorite at -2.5 with a 21.5 implied team total. He is my favorite value play at wide receiver. I think he's in a great spot this week playing this particular defense. Drew Lock, his quarterback, called him Mr. Reliable this past week. You have to like that. So he is trusting this receiver more so than Jerry Jeudy and who else do they have? Hamler, anyone else on that team. If you look at Denver specifically and their wide receiver core, I understand it fluctuates a lot, but he is the most consistent receiver on that team. The targets do fluctuate for Tim Patrick, but the big playability is there every single time he touches the ball. That's why you see 4 targets, but he still pays off with 4 catches and 80 yards or whatever. He has times where he only catches a couple of balls, but finds the end zone and does good things when the ball does get to his hands. Last but not least here, top 20 in yards per catch on the season. Something I like to pull out to focus in on him. 15.2 kind of fits directly in with what I had just said. When he gets the ball, in terms of catching the ball, he does a lot with it. 15.2 yards, top 20 in the NFL. Of the receivers for Denver, if you talk about Pro Football Focus and wide receiver cornerback matchup, Jerry Jeudy, Hamler, all those guys are in pretty tough matchups. Tim Patrick, of all of them, based upon what's projected and who's supposed to be covering him, Tim Patrick is in the best spot of those receivers. So I think the ball will go to him more often than not. And Carolina's defense here is allowing the 4th highest completion rate at 69%. I think that fits very, very well. It's something I focus in on when choosing receivers. Not only are they going to get targets, but the team they're facing, how good are they at defending those targets? And like you can see here, nearly 70% of the balls thrown into that secondary get caught. So Tim Patrick is a very, very cheap value play. I don't expect him to score a million points, but I think he can easily pay off his salary when we're looking for some lower price guys to fit with our more expensive stacks like Rodgers. And lastly here, everyone's favorite position, the tight end position. I want to mention 2 guys. First being Evan Engram, $4,300 on DraftKings, $57 on FanDuel. As always, I'm typically looking to pay down at tight end, and I think Evan Engram, especially on DraftKings, is just too low in terms of price, in terms of salary. Playing at home this week versus Arizona with a 45.5 over-under. The New York Giants are slight home underdogs at +3 with a 22 implied team total. Now, the good thing this week is Daniel Jones is back, as far as I can tell, and that's what the play is based on. If for some reason Daniel Jones is a no-go, I will not be playing Evan Engram. But as far as I can tell, Daniel Jones is back and will provide a boost to Evan Engram. They started hooking up a lot more over the last few weeks where Daniel Jones was starting. It started to look like a good connection between the two. And in general, Evan Engram offers a good value price on DraftKings, as I mentioned, averaging 8+ targets over the last 6 starts he's had with Daniel Jones. He continues to see red zone usage, which is exactly what you want out of a tight end. He leads New York Giants in both targets and red zone targets. So if you're going to pick a receiver from that team, it's got to be Evan Engram. It's going to be an up-tempo, faster-paced game facing Arizona. Arizona runs, super fast on offense. So you're going to see more opportunity this week. Might bump his, opportunity up 10-20% just based on pace. And then the Arizona defense in general, bottom 10 overall as a defense, and their secondary is graded 24th according to Pro Football Focus. Last but not least here, over the last couple of years, Arizona has really struggled to defend tight ends. The numbers don't show that this year, but I don't think much has changed in terms of that defense. So when they face a good tight end, we'll have to see how it plays out here in Evan Engram, which I do think he's a very talented, very athletic tight end. I think he can dominate this Arizona team, but at the very minimum, his price is so low it doesn't matter. We just need, 2x out of him, 8, 10, 12 points. If he goes higher than that, it's just icing on the cake. In a similar price here, we're going to, again, pay down Hunter Henry, 44 on DraftKings, 56 on FanDuel, playing at home versus Atlanta, 48.5 over-under. I think this is going to be a good game, a little bit of a shootout between both teams. The Chargers, though, are home underdogs at +1.5 with a 23.5 implied team total. Again, affordable salary here, offering value, excluding Week 13, where Herbert and that entire offense was just horrendous. Hunter Henry is averaging 7+ targets a game over the previous 3 games. So for a price tag of $4,400, for example, that's a really good average amount of targets. You're not going to find that out of too many players. That's why I do like and I'm comfortable playing Hunter Henry at this price tag. He's had at least 1 red zone target in each of the last 3 games. Again, excluding last week. The offense is averaging 50+ passing attempts per game over the last 3 games, which is just astronomical. They're just not playing good defense. They don't have much of an offensive line in terms of run blocking, so they're throwing the ball a ton. Just anyone in that passing game is going to see more volume as a result. He is second on the team in both targets and red zone targets, only behind Keenan Allen, so that's a really good sign. If there's going to be 50 passing attempts, 15 might go to Keenan Allen, but there's going to be a lot still left over for players like Hunter Henry. And then finally here, the last thing I want to mention, Atlanta allows the 4th most fantasy points per game to the tight end position. So it is a good matchup here versus Atlanta team, a team that does struggle to defend tight ends apparently so far this season. Hunter Henry squarely in play as another tight end option. So that wraps up the core plays, of course. We do want to talk about some other highlights. A lot of this stuff will change. We are on Friday evening, Friday night when you're watching this video. Maybe it's even Saturday. Things will change. Ownerships will be updated. Players will be rolled in, rolled out. Defenses, all that stuff will change. But as of right now, these are other players that I am considering and most certainly will have some way or another in my lineups. First being Justin Herbert, quarterback for Los Angeles Chargers. I considered him instead of Hill as my number 2, but in terms of the price, in terms of Hill being on the road, Herbert playing at home, this is what I ended up with. Herbert being my 3rd guy, but he is a guy I'm definitely interested in. That's a stack with Hunter Henry that's very cheap. You can go with Keenan Allen, the most consistent receiver on his team, but Justin Herbert is a guy that I'm definitely considering. In addition to that, I think Austin Eckler, their running back, is in a great spot this week. We've seen him get like 15 targets at times, even from Justin Herbert. So even if they're going to be behind, even if they don't have a great run blocking scheme or run blocking offensive line in general, I do like Austin Eckler this week. I will not be playing Herbert and Eckler together, but Eckler at his price tag is a guy I'm definitely interested in. It just didn't work in this particular video as a core play, simply because, again, I was trying to give you guys realistically priced guys that fit the stacks I mentioned up front. But Austin Eckler is a guy I don't want to avoid. I want to mention to you guys, as I will be having in my lineups. Another guy that's priced just continues to fall, and this guy has not been performing well, but in general, Ezekiel Elliott, his price is finally at a point where I'm definitely consider playing it. He still is like top 5 in receptions or top 5 in targets. There's a lot of numbers pointing that Ezekiel Elliott is still doing great things. He just is not finding the end zone and has not been paying off at really astronomical, typical Ezekiel Elliott prices. Price has fallen a lot. He's definitely in play this week. In addition to that, Melvin Gordon, running back for Denver. I like the spot he's in. He has seemingly taken the lead role in that offense. They are on the road, which is a little bit of a bummer, but in general, it's a really good matchup versus a really weak run defense. Melvin Gordon in play this week for Denver at running back. A.J. Brown, wide receiver for Tennessee. Go back and forth. Corey Davis, A.J. Brown, these guys are tearing it up. A.J. Brown, one of the best receivers in my opinion, one of the best young receivers definitely in the NFL. I do like him this week. Keenan Allen, kind of talked about it already, with Justin Herbert, without Justin Herbert. Dude averages like 1 billion targets a game. Opportunity is everything in DFS. You do want to play Keenan Allen where you can. Julio Jones, I understand he's been having a little bit of a down month or so, but in general, the numbers still support Julio Jones being an elite receiver. I don't mind playing him this week for Atlanta. A little bit of a lower price tag too makes it attractable. Allen Robinson, wide receiver for Chicago. It's a good pivot if you want to go off Montgomery because of ownership and everybody playing Montgomery. I think Allen Robinson is a good pivot off of that at wide receiver for Chicago. And then Jamison Crowder, one of these New York Jets receivers is going to score. It has to happen. They are playing one of the worst secondaries in football in general. I don't know if it's Crowder. I don't know. I know Mims is out, so it should boost Crowder. I don't know if it's Perriman. Somebody's going to score, but I don't mind looking at the Jets receivers, particularly Crowder. And last but not least here, if I'm going to pay up a tight end, it's Travis Kelce. Dude's a monster. It is Travis Kelce. I mean, that's the last thing I'll mention for him. But in general, that's really it. I hope you guys enjoy these videos. As always, thank you for tuning in. Hopefully this video came out early enough that you guys are able to benefit. As always, check down below in the description. I've linked up Daily Fantasy Nerd. Whether you play DFS on a regular basis, weekly basis, daily basis, whatever it is, Daily Fantasy Nerd is sure to help you become a better DFS player. It's a great time to sign up. You'll get a week for free. NBA is starting. It's a great optimizer for NBA. Again, if you want to play stuff daily, you can definitely take advantage of it there. But I use Daily Fantasy Nerd to not only set these videos, look at Vegas lines, but also to build my lineups, and we've been very successful with Daily Fantasy Nerd over the course of this season. So please make sure you check out the description down below. It also helps me out a little bit if you do click on that link. It helps the channel out. This is a small channel. We don't make any money on it, so anything like that is definitely helpful, and I do appreciate it. And so that really wraps it up. As always, thank you guys so much for tuning in. Again, hopefully these videos are helpful for you guys. I'd really appreciate it since we're at the end of the video here. If you've hung in this long, well, congratulations. You just won $1 million. I'm just kidding. What you did win is the ability to click subscribe to the channel and like it. Please make sure you also follow us at No Huddle FS. I wish you guys the best of luck in DFS this weekend. I am super pumped. I'm feeling real good about this weekend. I'm happy to be back to a regular full slate NFL DFS slate here, both on DraftKings and FanDuel. So as always though, good luck, and I will catch you in the next video.